I'm Marla Tisdale, 27, and literally last weekend, my rep as the family glue? Yeah, it totally backfired. The piece I'd worked my butt off to keep solid in our family's real estate empire, it blew up into a full-on meltdown at our so-called happy reunion dinner at the old Brooks estate. Elaine, my stepmother, with her fake tears and pearl clutching, straight up demanded I hand over control of Dad's company, claiming she was protecting his legacy. When I clapped back, pointing out her shady side deals, the room went dead silent. "You just ruined us, Marla," Elaine shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, with my siblings Vernon and Thelma staring like I'd just set the table on fire. But here's the tea. Their shade didn't break me, it lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost unreal what I'd do once I uncovered Dad's secret plan. It started with that dinner. But the real story goes back years. I was always the odd one out, the kid who'd rather sketch building designs than play dress-up with Thelma, or debate stocks with Vernon. Dad, though, he got me. He'd slip me his old journals, filled with notes on sustainable development, whispering, "You're the future, Marla." But Elaine? She'd roll her eyes, muttering about my daydreams. That night at the estate, her words hit harder than usual. She leaned across the mahogany table, her wine glass glinting, and said, "Marla, you're no leader. Step aside before you ruin us." My hands shook under the table, but I kept my chin up, meeting her gaze. Vernon smirked. Thelma fiddled with her napkin, avoiding my eyes. The air felt thick, like everyone was waiting for me to fold. I didn't. Instead, I remembered Dad's last months, how he'd grip my hand, his voice weak but firm. "Trust yourself, Marla." I didn't know then he'd already outsmarted Elaine, but I felt it. Something bigger was coming. That dinner wasn't just a fight, it was the start of me claiming what was mine. Elaine thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't know about the bombshell Dad left behind. I excused myself to the porch, the cool night air hitting my face, and checked my phone. A voicemail from Dad's lawyer Floyd waited. "Marla, we need to talk about the trust," he said. My heart skipped. Trust? What trust? I leaned against the railing, the stars above the estate brighter than ever, and felt a shift. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about Dad's vision, his belief in me. Elaine's smug face flashed in my mind, and I whispered to myself, "Game on." I wasn't just going to fight her, I was going to win. The porch's quiet didn't last long. Elaine's voice carried through the open window, griping about me to Vernon and Thelma, like I was some intern who'd botched a deal. I stayed out there, gripping the railing, my mind drifting back to years of being invisible in my own family. Growing up, I was the kid who'd spend hours in Dad's office, poring over blueprints while he explained zoning laws. By 16, I'd helped him pitch a community center that won a local award, my first taste of real estate's magic. Dad framed the article, hung it in his study, but at dinner that night, Vernon's new car got all the cheers. Thelma's pageant standing ovation. My award? Elaine skimmed it, said, "Cute hobby, Marla," and passed the potatoes. It wasn't just that night. At 19, I closed my first solo deal, a small retail strip, nothing fancy, but I'd hustled for months, negotiating with tenants, double-checking permits. Dad hugged me, eyes shining, but when I told the family, Thelma yawned, and Vernon muttered, "Beginner's luck." Elaine just smiled, that tight-lipped smirk, like I'd brought home a B+ report card. Meanwhile, Vernon's stock trades, which tanked half the time, got him labeled the investor. Thelma's interior design blog with barely 200 followers had Elaine gushing like it was Vogue. I'd sit there, fork in hand, swallowing the sting, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every ignored milestone piled up, a quiet weight in my chest. By 23, I was running point on Dad's green development projects, cutting costs while keeping his vision intact. I'd stay up late, triple-checking contracts, my desk littered with coffee cups. Once, I saved a deal by catching a zoning error Vernon missed. He got a bonus anyway. At family dinners, I'd try sharing my wins, but Elaine would steer the talk to Thelma's latest photo shoot or Vernon's big plans. Dad would squeeze my hand under the table, his way of saying he saw me, but even he couldn't stop their dismissals. I started keeping my successes quiet, letting them think I was just helping Dad. Last year, I landed a multi-million-dollar contract for a sustainable housing project. The client shook my hand, said, "Marla, you're a game changer." I waited for that dinner, thinking maybe this time they'd notice. Nope. Elaine toasted Vernon's new condo instead. Thelma babbled about her brand. I sat there, my smile tight, feeling like a ghost. Dad, already sick, caught my eye, his face heavy with something unspoken. I didn't know then he was planning to protect me, but I felt his belief, like a lifeline. Back on the porch, Elaine's laugh snapped me out of it. My phone buzzed again, Floyd's number. I didn't pick up, not yet. My fingers brushed the journal in my bag, one Dad gave me before he passed. I hadn't opened it yet, scared of what it'd say. But as Elaine's voice droned on, I knew I couldn't keep hiding. Whatever Dad left me, whatever Floyd was hinting at, it was time to face it. I straightened up, the cold air steadying me. They could ignore me all they wanted, but I wasn't invisible anymore. I slipped back into the house, avoiding the dining room, where Elaine was still holding court, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. In Dad's old study, I shut the door and pulled his journal from my bag, its leather cover worn from his hands. My heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting just his usual notes on land deals. Instead, I found a letter tucked inside, addressed to me in his shaky scrawl. "Marla, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but you're ready," it began. My throat tightened. He wrote about Elaine's greed, how he'd seen her siphoning funds, cozying up to board members. Then, the bombshell. Months before his diagnosis, he'd placed the company and most of his assets into an irrevocable trust, in my name. I sank into his chair, the journal trembling in my hands. Dad had known Elaine would come for everything. He'd spent his final months outsmarting her, working with Floyd to lock the trust airtight. "You're the only one I trust to carry this forward," he wrote. "Your vision, your grit, it's what Brooks Realty needs." I pressed my fingers to my eyes, fighting tears. All those late nights, I thought I was just helping. He was watching, planning. He'd seen what I built, every deal I closed, every project I saved. The trust wasn't just money, it was his belief in me, etched in legal ink. But it wasn't easy to accept. I'd spent years proving myself, grinding through sleepless nights to master contracts, zoning laws, client pitches. Once at 24, I'd stayed up 48 hours straight to save a deal from collapsing, my eyes burning as I reworked numbers in a dimly lit office. Vernon had called it overkill. Elaine said I was trying too hard. Dad, though, had slipped me a coffee and a nod, saying, "That's my girl." Now, reading his words, I saw he'd been building a fortress around me, knowing Elaine would strike. The trust was my aha moment, but it came with weight. Leading Brooks Realty wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Dad's dream of responsible development, communities built with care, not greed. I flipped through the journal, finding his notes on projects I'd inspired, like the affordable housing complex I'd pushed for. My chest swelled, but doubt crept in. Could I really take on Elaine? Her lawyers were sharks, and my siblings were already in her pocket. I traced Dad's handwriting, my fingers steadying. He'd chosen me for a reason. A knock at the door jolted me. Thelma's voice, hesitant. "Marla, you okay?" I snapped the journal shut, my pulse racing. I wasn't ready to face them, not yet. "Fine," I called, voice tight. I slipped the letter into my pocket, its edges sharp against my fingers. Elaine's laughter echoed from the dining room, and I knew what was coming tomorrow. The annual family dinner where she'd make her move. But now I had Dad's plan. I stood, squared my shoulders, and whispered, "You're not winning this, Elaine." The fight was on, and I was done hiding. I left the study, Dad's letter tucked close, its weight grounding me as I moved through the house. Tomorrow was the annual family dinner at the Brooks estate, and my stomach knotted just thinking about it. Brooks Realty was on the verge of a game-changing deal, a sustainable urban project I'd spearheaded, set to close next week. It was my biggest win yet, years of my designs and pitches coming together. But Elaine's shadow loomed. I knew she'd use the dinner to push her agenda, probably with some slick lawyer in tow. I headed upstairs to my old room, the one Dad kept unchanged, with my teenage sketches still pinned to the corkboard. Sitting on the bed, I pulled out my phone and replayed Floyd's voicemail. "Marla, the trust is ironclad, but Elaine's filing a challenge. Be ready." My fingers hovered over Floyd's number, but I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my laptop, scrolling through the deal's final documents. The project's renderings, green rooftops, community spaces, felt like Dad's vision brought to life. I'd spent months pitching it, meeting clients over coffee, my hands steady despite their skeptical glances at my age. Now, it was so close to reality, but Elaine's threat hung heavy. I imagined her at the dinner, her fake smile as she'd twist Dad's legacy to suit her greed. My jaw clenched and I shut the laptop, harder than I meant to. Downstairs, the house was quiet now, the others gone to bed. I wandered to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water, my reflection flickering in the dark window. I looked tired, bags under my eyes, hair messily tied back. Leading the company wasn't just a job, it was personal. Dad's journals, stacked in my bag, were my armor, but doubt still gnawed. What if Elaine's lawyers outmaneuvered me? Vernon and Thelma's betrayal stung too, they'd always followed her lead. I sipped the water, its coldness sharpening my focus. I couldn't let them win. I pulled out the journal again, flipping to a page where Dad had written, "Marla sees what others miss." It was about a deal I'd caught a flaw in, saving millions. He'd believed in me then, and now he'd bet everything on me. I traced the words, my resolve hardening. Tomorrow's dinner would be a battlefield, but I wasn't walking in blind. I'd bring the trust documents, Floyd's number on speed dial, and every ounce of grit I'd built over years of being overlooked. Elaine thought she could steamroll me, but she didn't know I'd been preparing for this my whole life. As I climbed into bed, the estate's old walls creaked like they were whispering Dad's strength to me. I set my alarm, my mind racing with tomorrow's plan. Elaine's smug face flashed in my head, but so did Dad's handwriting. I wasn't just fighting for the company, I was fighting for him. For me. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, it was with one thought: tomorrow, I'd face her head on. I stepped into the Brooks Estate's dining room, the chandelier casting long shadows across the polished table, and felt the air shift like a storm was brewing. Elaine sat at the head, her silk scarf screaming money, her smile sharp as a blade. Vernon slouched to her right, scrolling his phone, while Thelma fidgeted with her earrings, avoiding my gaze. I smoothed my blazer, the trust documents tucked in my bag like a hidden weapon, and took my seat. The clink of silverware felt louder than it should. Elaine didn't waste time. "Marla, dear," she started, her voice syrupy, "how's your little real estate hobby going?" Her eyes glinted and Vernon snorted, not even looking up. Thelma forced a laugh, her fingers twisting her napkin. I gripped my fork, the metal cool against my palm. "It's not a hobby, Elaine," I said, keeping my tone even. "I've been running Dad's projects for years." She waved a hand, dismissing me like I'd offered her a bad deal. "Oh, sure, but let's be real, you're out of your depth with the company." Her words landed like a slap, but I held her stare, my pulse steady. Vernon chimed in, "Yeah, Marla, stick to small stuff. Elaine's got the board eating out of her hand." Thelma nodded, her voice soft but cutting. "It's just, Dad would have wanted someone experienced. The betrayal stung, but I expected it." They'd always danced to Elaine's tune. The dinner dragged on, each course a new jab. Elaine, casually, mentioned her plans to restructure Brooks Realty, her fingers brushing her wineglass like she was toasting her victory. "The board agrees we need a stronger leader," she said, her eyes locking on mine. I caught Vernon's smirk, Thelma's quick glance away. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile, sipping my water to buy time. They didn't know about the trust, and I wasn't tipping my hand yet. I noticed Elaine's nails tapping the table. A nervous tick she hid behind her polished act. Good, she wasn't as confident as she played. I tried to steer the conversation to the sustainable project I was closing, hoping to remind them of my work. "The urban development deal's set for next week," I said, voice firm. "It's Dad's vision, green, community-focused." Elaine cut me off, laughing. "Oh, Marla, that's cute, but let's leave the big ideas to professionals." Vernon chuckled, and Thelma murmured agreement, her eyes on her plate. The room felt smaller, their words piling up like bricks. I clenched my napkin under the table, my knuckles whitening. They thought they could bury me, but Dad's letter burned in my mind. "You're ready." As the dessert plates arrived, Elaine leaned forward, her voice low. "Marla, step aside gracefully or this gets messy." The threat hung there, naked. I met her gaze, my heart pounding but my voice calm. "I'm not going anywhere, Elaine." The room stilled, forks pausing midair. She blinked, caught off guard, and I felt a spark of power. My phone buzzed in my bag. Floyd, probably. I didn't check it, but it reminded me. I had Dad's plan, and Elaine's game was about to unravel. The silence after my words hung heavy, the dining room's chandelier light flickering like it felt the tension. Elaine's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing as she set her dessert spoon down with a deliberate clink. "Marla, you're being childish," she said, her voice icy now, dropping the fake warmth. "Brooks Realty needs a real leader, not a dreamer playing at Daddy's desk." Vernon leaned back, arms crossed, smirking like he'd already won a bet. Thelma's fingers froze on her glass, her eyes darting between us. I felt the weight of their stares, but Dad's letter in my pocket kept me steady. Elaine leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I'm filing a legal challenge tomorrow to take control. Your father's wishes were clear and you're not fit." The words hit like a gut punch, but I didn't flinch. She was making it official, disowning me from Dad's legacy, painting me as some incompetent kid. Vernon piped up, "She's right, Marla, you've never handled the big stuff." Thelma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It's for the best, Marla." My chest burned, their betrayal sharper than I'd braced for. Years of being sidelined flashed through my mind, every ignored deal, every patronizing pat on the head. I wanted to scream, but I kept my face neutral, my hand steady on the table. Elaine thought she'd cornered me, her fingers drumming that nervous tick again, betraying her calm facade. I opened my mouth to respond, but Elaine pressed on, her voice rising. "You're out of your league, Marla. The board agrees, and I've got the paperwork ready." She gestured to a folder by her plate, thick with documents, her trump card. My siblings nodded like obedient puppets, and I felt the room tilt, their united front suffocating. I reached for my water, my fingers brushing my bag where Dad's journal sat. His words echoed. "You're the future." I wasn't done yet. Then it came, the moment Elaine thought would break me. "You're no longer part of this family's legacy," she said, her voice formal, like she was reading a verdict. "Step down, or I'll drag this through court." The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with her ultimatum. Vernon's smirk widened. Thelma looked at her plate, her hands twisting her napkin into knots. I felt the sting, but something else stirred. Anger, not fear. Elaine thought she'd won, but she didn't know Dad's plan. I straightened, my voice low but clear. "You're wrong, Elaine. Dad's wishes were clear, and they're not what you think." Her eyes flickered with doubt, just for a second, but she doubled down, scoffing. "You're delusional, Marla." I didn't respond, letting her words hang. My phone buzzed again in my bag, insistent. I ignored it, but I knew it was Floyd, and I knew what was coming. Elaine's verdict was meant to crush me, but it only sharpened my focus. She'd just declared war, and I was ready to fight, not with her theatrics, but with Dad's truth. I pushed my chair back slightly, my heart racing, but my resolve ironclad. The real battle was about to start. Elaine's words still echoed in the dining room, her ultimatum hanging like a guillotine, when my phone buzzed again, louder this time, rattling against the trust documents in my bag. I glanced at it. Floyd's name flashed on the screen. Elaine's eyes darted to the sound, her brow twitching, but she pressed on, waving her folder of legal papers like a weapon. "You'll regret fighting this, Marla," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. Vernon chuckled, leaning back like he was watching a show, while Thelma's fingers knotted her napkin tighter, her face pale. I ignored them, my pulse quickening as I slipped my phone out and answered, keeping my voice low. "Floyd, now's not great," I murmured. "Marla, you need to hear this," Floyd's voice crackled, urgent. "The trust is active. Your father's lawyer filed it months before he passed. It's airtight, and you're the sole beneficiary of Brooks Realty and the assets." My breath caught, the room fading as his words sank in. Dad hadn't just planned, he'd built a fortress. Floyd kept going. "Elaine's challenge is baseless. She has no claim. I'm sending you the trust details now." I glanced at Elaine, her smug expression faltering as she caught my shift in demeanor. My fingers tightened around the phone, a spark igniting in my chest. I stood, cutting Floyd off. "Send it, and meet me tomorrow." I hung up, my eyes locking on Elaine. The room stilled, forks clinking to a stop. "Something you want to share, Marla?" Elaine asked, her voice dripping with condescension, but her hands betrayed her, fidgeting with her scarf. I stepped forward, my voice steady, louder now. "Actually, yes, Dad set up an irrevocable trust, Elaine. The company's mine. Legally, undeniably. Your challenge? It's a waste of paper." Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Vernon's smirk vanished, Thelma's napkin fell to the table. Elaine sputtered, "That's absurd. He'd never." I cut her off, pulling Dad's journal from my bag, its leather-worn but heavy with truth. "He did, and he wrote it all down. Your side deals, your boardroom whispers, he saw it coming." I flipped it open, not to read but to let its presence hit her. The room felt electric, like the air before a storm breaks. Vernon shifted, his chair creaking, and muttered, "What's she talking about?" Thelma's eyes widened, darting to Elaine, who gripped the table's edge, her knuckles white. I didn't need to say more, the trust's power was clear. Elaine's folder, her big threat, looked pathetic now, a prop in a play she'd already lost. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something fiercer. Vindication. Dad's plan had shifted everything, and I stood taller, feeling his strength in me. "You thought you could erase me," I said, my voice low but cutting. "But Dad chose me." Elaine's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes flashing with panic. The call had changed it all, and I wasn't backing down. Elaine's silence was deafening, her usual composure cracking as she stared at the journal in my hand, its worn cover a quiet rebuke to her schemes. The dining room felt like a courtroom, the air thick with the weight of my words. Vernon shifted uncomfortably, his phone forgotten, while Thelma's eyes flicked between me and Elaine, her hands twisting in her lap. I stepped closer to the table, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "You thought you could rewrite Dad's legacy, Elaine, but he saw through you." I opened the journal, pulling out the letter he'd written, its creased edges proof of his foresight. "He documented everything. Your secret meetings, the funds you funneled, it's all here." Elaine's face twisted, her voice rising in a shaky defense. "Lies! You forged that, Marla." But her hands betrayed her, clutching her scarf like a lifeline. I held up the letter, not breaking eye contact. "This is Dad's handwriting, and Floyd has the legal proof. The trust is ironclad." I turned to Vernon and Thelma, their faces pale. "You backed her, thinking I'd fold, but Dad chose me because he knew I'd fight for what's right." Vernon's jaw tightened and Thelma looked away, her fingers stilling. I set the journal down, its thud echoing in the quiet. "Elaine, your challenge is a sham and the board will know it by tomorrow." I pulled out my phone, showing Floyd's email with the trust documents, the timestamp glowing. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through. "You can't," she started, but I cut her off. "I already have. Dad's vision, sustainable communities, integrity, that's what I'm protecting, not your greed." The words felt like a release, years of being sidelined pouring out. Vernon finally spoke, his voice low. "Marla, you're blowing this out of proportion." I turned to him, my gaze steady. "Am I? Or were you just happy to let Elaine run the show while you cashed in?" He flinched, and Thelma's head dropped, her silence louder than any apology. Elaine tried to rally, her voice shrill. "The board won't stand for this." But it was hollow, and she knew it. I picked up my bag, the trust documents inside like armor. "They already have," I said. "Floyd's meeting them in the morning." I turned to leave, pausing at the door to face them one last time. "You thought you could disown me, but I'm not the one who's lost here." Elaine's mouth opened, but no words came. Vernon stared at the table. Thelma's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. I walked out, the estate's heavy doors closing behind me with a satisfying thud. The cool night air hit my face and I exhaled, my breath visible under the stars. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the rush of standing my ground. Dad's trust wasn't just a legal win. It was his voice, still guiding me. I climbed into my car, the journal on the seat beside me, and felt something new. Freedom. Elaine's hypocrisy was exposed, and I was just getting started. The drive from the estate was a blur, Elaine's stunned face fading in my rearview mirror as I headed to my office downtown. I didn't go home. Instead, I needed people who'd always had my back. Pulling into the parking lot of Brooks Realty, the building's glass facade glowed under the streetlights, a beacon of Dad's vision. Inside, my team, my real family, was waiting. I'd texted them on the way, and there they were. Selma, my project manager with her ever-present coffee mug, Dwayne, the architect who'd sketched late nights with me, and Floyd, who'd beaten me to the office, his tie loosened, but his grin wide. The contrast to the toxic dinner hit me hard as I walked in, the warmth of their voices wrapping around me like a hug. Selma spotted me first, setting her mug down with a clink. "Marla, you okay? You look like you just fought a dragon." I laughed, the sound surprising me, and dropped into a chair, the journal still in my hand. Close enough, I said, my voice softer than I meant. I told them everything. The dinner, Elaine's ultimatum, the trust. Duane leaned forward, his pencil tapping the table, eyes wide. Your dad was a genius, Marla. He knew you'd carry this. Floyd nodded, sliding a printed copy of the trust across the desk. It's bulletproof. Elaine's got nothing. We sat around the conference table, the city skyline dark outside, and it felt like home. Selma poured me coffee, her hand brushing mine, a quiet show of support. We talked about the urban project, the one I'd poured my heart into. Duane pulled up the latest renderings, his excitement contagious. This is your legacy, Marla, he said, pointing to the green rooftops on the screen. I smiled, my chest loosening for the first time all night. These weren't blood relatives, but they were chosen. People who saw my work, not my flaws. I thought back to the dinner, Elaine's cold dismissal, Vernon's smirk, Thelma's silence. Then I looked at Selma, laughing as she mimicked Elaine's scarf fiddling, and Floyd, already planning the board meeting to shut down Elaine's challenge. This was what Dad meant by legacy, not just buildings but trust, loyalty. I ran my fingers over the journal, its pages full of his notes and mine, intertwined. He believed in me, I said, almost to myself. Selma caught it, her eyes soft. And we do too. We stayed late, hashing out next steps, the room buzzing with purpose. Duane sketched ideas for the project's community center, his pencil flying. Floyd outlined the legal strategy, his confidence steadying me. As I watched them, I realized this was what Elaine could never take. My real allies, my real strength. The dinner had been a battlefield, but here, I was home. I stood, stretching, and caught my reflection in the window, my shoulders straighter now. The fight wasn't over, but with these people by my side, I was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the office huddle, I woke to a flood of texts from Vernon and Thelma, their tones a mix of groveling and defensiveness, like they just realized they'd backed the wrong horse. Vernon's message read, Marla, let's talk. Family sticks together, right? Thelma's was softer. I didn't mean to hurt you, Marla. I stared at my phone, my coffee cooling on the kitchen counter, and felt a flicker of the old urge to smooth things over. But then I remembered Elaine's icy verdict, their silence, as she tried to erase me. My fingers hovered over the reply button, but I set the phone down, my jaw tight. No more playing peacemaker. I headed to the office, the journal in my bag, its weight a reminder of Dad's trust. Floyd was already there, his laptop open, prepping for the board meeting to squash Elaine's challenge. They're scrambling, he said, nodding at his email. Elaine's lawyer called, fishing for a settlement. I smirked, leaning against the desk. She's got nothing to offer. Floyd's grin matched mine. Exactly. Let's set the terms now. We spent the morning strategizing, my hands steady as I signed documents affirming my control. But it wasn't just about the company. It was about drawing a line. By noon, I called a meeting with my team. Selma and Duane sat across from me, their faces expectant. Elaine's out, but my siblings might try to weasel back in, I said, my voice firm. From now on, no one gets a free pass, not even family. Selma nodded, her pen tapping. About time, Marla. You've carried them too long. Duane agreed, his sketch pad open but untouched. I laid out new rules, no family involvement in Brooks Realty unless they earned it, no more bending to guilt trips. My voice didn't waver, but my fingers traced the edge of Dad's journal, grounding me. Later Vernon called. I let it go to voicemail, his voice tinny through the speaker. Marla, come on, we're family, don't shut us out. I deleted it, my chest tight but lighter. Thelma tried next, her text longer, pleading about misunderstandings. I typed back, prove it with actions, not words, and hit send before I could second guess. Elaine stayed silent, probably regrouping with her lawyers, but I was done waiting for her next move. I walked to the window, the city sprawling below, and felt a shift. I wasn't just protecting Dad's legacy, I was building my own. By evening, I'd drafted a statement for the board, clarifying my role as leader and the trust's terms. Floyd read it, nodding. This shuts the door, Marla. I signed it, my pen steady, and felt the weight of years of invisibility lift. My boundaries weren't just words, they were walls, and I'd defend them. As I left the office, the journal in my bag, I glanced at my phone. No new messages? Good. The silence felt like victory. The board meeting was over, Elaine's challenge dismantled by Floyd's airtight presentation of the trust. And I walked out of Brooks Realty's office feeling taller, the journal still in my bag like a talisman. That afternoon, I drove to the site of the urban development project, the one I'd fought for, its skeleton of steel beams rising against the skyline. Hard hats dotted the lot, workers moving with purpose, and I felt Dad's vision alive in every brick. I stepped out of my car, the air thick with dust and possibility, and pulled on a safety vest. This wasn't just a project, it was my chance to redefine what the Brooks name meant, on my terms. Selma met me at the site, her clipboard in hand, pointing out the progress on the community center. "Your green roofing idea's a hit," she said, her smile wide. I nodded, running my fingers along a blueprint pinned to a makeshift table, the lines echoing Dad's sketches in his journal. I'd spent years pushing for sustainable development, pitching ideas that Elaine had scoffed at as unrealistic. Now, standing here, I saw it taking shape: affordable homes, green spaces, a legacy of integrity, not greed. My chest swelled, but not with pride. It was deeper, like I was finally honoring Dad's belief in me. I walked the site, my boots crunching gravel, and talked with the crew. A worker, Hank, tipped his hard hat, saying, "Miss Tisdale, this project's changing lives already." I smiled, my throat tight, and thanked him. Back at the table, I opened the journal, showing Selma one of Dad's notes about building communities, not just profits. "This is what we're doing," I said, my voice steady. She squeezed my shoulder, her eyes soft. "He'd be proud, Marla." Later, I met with the city council, presenting the project's impact. Jobs created, families housed. They listened, nodding, one counselor saying, "This is what Brooks Realty should be." I caught my reflection in the meeting room's glass, my posture strong, no trace of the invisible girl from family dinners. Elaine's shadow lingered, but it was fading. I wasn't just reclaiming Dad's legacy, I was making it mine, proving I was the leader he'd trusted. My siblings' texts had stopped, their silence a grudging acceptance. I didn't need their approval anymore. As the sun set, I stood alone at the site, the city lights flickering on. The journal rested in my hands, its pages worn but alive. I thought of Dad's last words to me: "Build something lasting, Marla." I was. Every beam, every plan was a step toward that. I tucked the journal away, my resolve ironclad. The Brooks name wouldn't stand for Elaine's greed or my siblings' betrayal. It would stand for something real, something good. I turned back to my car, the skyline glowing, and knew this was just the beginning. The project site faded from view as I drove home, the city lights blurring into streaks, Dad's journal on the passenger seat like a quiet companion. I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, the engine's hum cutting off, leaving only the soft tick of cooling metal. Inside, I sank onto my couch, the journal in my lap, and let the day settle. The board's approval, the crew's respect, Selma's steady presence, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking. But it wasn't just the company or the project that grounded me now. It was something deeper, something I'd been chasing through every ignored milestone and sidelined dinner: my own worth. I flipped open the journal, not to Dad's letter, but to a random page where he'd scribbled, "Marla's got the heart for this." My fingers traced the words, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of Elaine's dismissals or my siblings' betrayal. I'd spent years proving myself to them, to the board, to the world, but sitting here in the quiet of my own space, I realized I didn't need their validation. Dad's trust wasn't just about the company, it was his way of saying I was enough. My eyes stung, but I smiled, the weight of years lifting off my chest. I thought back to the dinner, Elaine's cold verdict, Vernon's smirk, Thelma's silence. They tried to erase me, but I'd walked away stronger, not broken. The trust, the project, the team, they were proof of what I could build, not just for Dad, but for me. I set the journal down, my hands steady, and looked around my apartment, the small space filled with my sketches, my books, my life. This was my peace. Not in winning against Elaine, but in knowing I'd honored Dad's vision and found my own. I stood, stretching, and walked to the window, the city sprawling below, alive and constant. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. That was the real victory. Dad's belief had carried me, but now I carried myself. I'd keep building, not to prove them wrong, but because it was who I was. The fight was over, and I'd won by being me. Have you ever had to fight to be seen, to prove your worth, to people who should have had your back? That's where I was, caught in a storm of betrayal, but finding my strength in Dad's trust and my own grit. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Standing up to Elaine, reclaiming Brooke's Realty, wasn't just about winning, it was about knowing I was enough, no matter who tried to dim my light. You are too. Keep building your own legacy, your way.